So welcome to our AGM and Chamber Priorities event. My name is Anna Christie. I'm the CEO of the Sussex Chamber. Firstly, we will get our AGM underway. So I would like to introduce Rob Clare, Chairman of Sussex Chamber of Commerce. Rob.
Thanks, Anna. Good morning, all. Harry's just sent a message to say he's joining us from Greece, so if anyone wants to insult him on chat, that's fine by me. Harry, nice to see you. Welcome, everybody. And Steve at LED, thank you. Welcome to your first Chamber meeting, first AGM. And our 30th AGM, and as I said on the chat, first and I hope last by Zoom, because it's interesting. The amount of conversations I've had this week where, you know, Zoom has almost become a verb, and zoomed out is now the phrase of the week, where I think people are getting rather tired of Zoom and just wanting to have a phone conversation instead of wondering whether their bookcase is up to it compared to everyone else's bookcase, real or virtual. But welcome. There's some formal business for the AGM, so let me just go through the sort of order of play. I'll go through in a moment. Hopefully everybody's got an agenda, but it'll be the normal things. I'll just probably ask the board members. I'm not sure if everybody's seen the minutes of our 29th AGM, just if there's any issues from those. I'll present the accounts for approval, and then we'll propose a motion for the reappointment of auditors. That essentially, yeah, plus any questions, any other business. Those are the formal items for the AGM. AGMs are always slightly odd in a way that you know they're reflective on a period that ended 31st of March 2020. So whilst it might seem slightly odd, I'll restrict most of my comments to that period of old history. And then Anna will talk some more about what the Chamber has been doing since the end of March. And then we'll once there's questions around the accounts, if there's any questions on the accounts, which Melanie Richardson will be delighted to answer, we'll then move to introduce Anna Marsh, Director General of the British Chamber of Commerce, for the final part of the meeting. So that's the order of play. So could I just, rather than asking for comments, anyone to comment by exception if there's anything in the very brief minutes of the 29th AGM that were inaccurate or need calling out? I'll give it a few seconds, but if there are no objections, I'll take those as read, and we'll, Anna, I think someone will physically sign them there. You or Alison will?
I will. I'll sign them on behalf of the board and on behalf of yourself, Rob.
Okay. I'll just give it a few seconds and watch for any violent objections to some of the shortest minutes ever. Okay, there's nothing coming back at me, so we'll take those as read and through. Okay. So agenda item number 2 is you know, to formally put the accounts for Sussex Chamber of Commerce and Enterprise and for Sussex Enterprise Limited to the AGM. So these, as I said, are for the period ending 31st of March. So the sun's decided to come out just as I'm talking, so apologies. I'm partly in shadow and partly in sun, but there we are. So, I mean, the year ending 31st March 2020 does seem like an awful long time ago, but for the formality of the AGM, let me just give a reflective on that period, which, you know, for your chamber, I think the strength of the chamber is that we continue to give very balanced financial performance, with income from member fees, from back in those days, physical events, and also from trade, from export documentation. So, you know, the chamber is, you know, financially, we're reporting a steady ship for a further year, which is a very good thing. You know, revenue, you know, very similar to previous year. It's just shy of £1 million at 931,000 against 935 last year, and a profit of 31,000 against 24,000 last year. Both those measures were just ahead of budget. I think in the context of what was 3 quarters of 2019 and one quarter of 2020. It was only in December of 2019 that we had any sort of political stability. Obviously now we just have political brinkmanship, and I wouldn't mind betting that Adam might talk about that a wee bit as we come to the deadlines in a few days' time for a trade deal or not on Brexit. But given everything that was going on in the uncertainty at that time, I think a credible performance for the Chamber. And something that probably goes a bit under the radar is the amount of export documentation that we process. And it's about 85 documents a day. And I expect, Anna, that ebbs and flows a bit. But that's 22,500 documents over a year, which is a huge part of the Chamber's business. We've held good around 800 members, dropped by the end of the year to 746, which is an 88% retention rate. And I think that the purpose of the Chamber is to be relevant to its members, to retain its members and attract new members. And whilst, again, in the circumstances of uncertainty, circumstances of the economy, that's a credible performance. It's something that is very much before me, Anna, the team and the board about how the Chamber continues to be relevant, how it continues to be a voice for its members, advocating and lobbying on its behalf. And I think when Anna talks in a little while about what the Chamber has been doing, from a national but also from a local perspective, and I'm sure when Adam speaks as well, that relevance of the Chamber, I think, and its increased relevance, hopefully, is something that will be acknowledged and recognised. Not only by those of you that have very kindly joined our AGM, but in the wider business community. I think we always say through the Chamber you're better connected, and I think that we've all had to try and adapt and adopt new ways of working since lockdown, and I do thanks to Anna and the team. I think that the Chamber has been at the forefront of some of that change. In the year in question, we were certainly the most active business membership organisation in Sussex through all of our events and through our representation across the county. Trying to be a conduit, a bridge between the various organisations that have a role in supporting business across Sussex. I think what Anna certainly works very hard to do is to try and join those things up and help them make sense to the business community, because it can be difficult to navigate and it can seem like a bit of a bowl of spaghetti at times. And Anna and the team work very hard to bring sense to some of that. Obviously, at the end of the year, in sort of the last week or so of the year in question, the UK went into lockdown because of COVID-19. What I would say before just asking Anna to say a few words about the period post the end of March, is the Chamber does have strong cash reserves. So, as an ongoing business, as a going concern, if you like, we have strong cash reserves. We are able to trade. Membership has held good. We've been able to do some things to support the cash flow of members as they renew. But it's appropriate to say, to you on behalf of the board that the cash position and the reserves of the Chamber are strong, and we are able to continue trading comfortably without any diminution of service through this period. I hesitate to say for however long it lasts, but we are certainly able to trade through this period for a significant amount of time. And we will continue to invest in enhancing membership services and trying to lead the way, communicate and learn digitally with our members. And when it's safe to do so, we have started to come back to the face-to-face environment that for business we all love, and have much more of those sort of serendipitous moments that just don't happen, as hard as we try. through Zoom, and other media. So in sort of closing my remarks around the year to 31st of March 2020, I thank again the team at the Chamber. I thank my board of directors, and thank the members. And on closing, I would just say it's relevant to say to the meeting that with my huge personal thanks, I'd like to say thank you to Rhonda Blackwell and Melanie Richardson, who subsequent to the end of the year have both announced their decision to resign as non-exec directors of the Chamber, and particularly thanks to Melanie, who has for a number of years, and is during this meeting holding the pen as chair of the audit committee. So my personal thanks and thanks to the team, to them. So Anna, do you want to say a few words in terms of I think what the Chamber locally has been doing, and I'm sure you touch on nationally to an extent as well, since the end of March. Then when Anna has finished, I would just put the formal motion to the AGM to receive and accept the accounts.
Thank you, Rob. So since lockdown, we obviously we had to look at remote working, apart from my export team, who had to be in the office because of the processes required. So the export team continued to work in the office, although the income for export documentation was impacted by almost 50% because there were no flights, there were no shipments or anything. So that impacted exporters trying to get their goods overseas. Even though we were processing the documents, they weren't actually able to go out. All of our events and training courses had to go online, they were all virtual. And that for a number of months, we were providing more awareness, business awareness events. So we were running these for free. Again, no income there for the Chamber. However, membership was fairly stable. We've managed to retain a high level of membership, 89% in terms of our retention. We added value to the membership, ensuring that every level was able to access the Chamber Protect service, such as the HR and the legal services, which were hugely important when staff or businesses were being furloughed, furloughing staff. So we also introduced a Chamber Finance Finder, which was also a really useful way of businesses finding out what loans, funding, grants, and other sources of funding were available to them. So the membership has been fairly stable. We were able to enhance the membership. We've also been very supportive and lobbying really hard through just locally, the engagement through different MPs, local authorities, as well as then feeding this back to Adam Marshall, to the British Chambers. This has been the biggest part of what the Chamber has been doing, representing businesses in the last few months. So we've been able to, for example, provide businesses with funding to retain employees, extending the furlough schemes, income support for self-employed, looking at 3-month suspension, of business rates, VAT, national insurance payments, and that's just a few of the Chamber wins and the successes that we have been able to campaign on behalf of businesses. So all of our webinars were free informational webinars in terms of the furlough scheme or loans and grants. We also reduced our expenditure and recruitment and any new projects that we had planned to grow the Chamber, so that we could just make sure that we were stable and we were here to support businesses. We carried out surveys and research work on behalf of one of the LEPs for Coastal Capital. And now we're in a position that we're starting to grow. Our exports are back to almost 100%, I would say probably about 90–95% of revenue compared to previous years. We've expanded the membership team. We've recruited another 2 new members. We're about to appoint 4 Chamber Customs staff, and customs declarations will be a new requirement when we leave the EU at the end of the year. we're also acting as an intermediary for the Kickstart scheme, which is a scheme to support businesses employ young people to get them into work. So that is really what we've been doing the last few months. We are steadily growing. We're back in the office. We're all COVID secure. We've carried out a full risk assessment, and we've got plans to keep on supporting our businesses. I will hand it back to Rob so we can complete the formalities of the AGM.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. What I'd like to do, just in terms of formal parts of the business, is in a moment I'll just ask if there are any questions regarding the accounts for the year ended March 2020. And then I think what I'd like to do in terms of general questions, either for Sussex, for the BCC overall, state of the world, anything you'd like to ask. What I propose we do is leave that section until, if Adam's happy, that we do that after Adam has spoken, so that we don't have, a Q&A session now and then a Q&A session at the end. So if that's okay, and I saw Adam nod. What I'd like to do is then just ask if there are any questions regarding the accounts for the year ended 31st of March 2020 for Sussex Enterprise Limited or Sussex Chamber of Commerce and Enterprise.
I can't see any hands going up, Rob.
Nothing.
Any questions? I'll just see if anybody's coming off mute. No? No questions at all.
And that's fine, because they usually aren't. So Melanie can now have a huge sigh of relief, because I know she was very anxious about this. So thank you very much. What I'd like now to do is just formally propose a motion to the meeting to receive and approve those sets of accounts then. And I need a proposer and a seconder, if someone can wave or raise their hand or even come off mute and shout. Yes,
so we will need somebody to approve and somebody to second both sets of accounts for Sussex Enterprise Limited and Sussex Chamber of Commerce.
We have to do each one separately. I can see Andrew's.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. So, Andrew, you happy to propose the accounts for Sussex Chamber of Commerce and Enterprise? Yes, and a seconder for that? I saw Martin waving at me. Martin, happy to second? Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Could I then have a proposer for the accounts for Sussex Enterprise Limited? Andrew is waving at me.
And Andrew Hookway.
Yeah. And a seconder, please?
Penina. I think that's Andrew and Penina, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, Zebra's got his hand up. Thank you very much. Okay, the other formal piece of business for the meeting is to put a motion to the meeting to reappoint our current auditors, Neil James, and to give the board of directors the authority to fix their remuneration. Neil James has been our auditor for a number of years, and we are proposing to reappoint. So, unless there are any objections to that, which I'll happily take, could I ask for a proposer for the reappointment of Neil James as auditors, please? Andrew Hookway again proposed, thank you. And Martin as a seconder, thank you. I think you just raised just a second before Penina on my electronic timing equipment. So thank you very much. So the final formal piece of business for the AGM is normally sort of any other business question. But let's discuss what I'd like to do now is hand over to Adam. Anna, did you want to? I shall say something at the end, but did you want to say something to introduce Adam, who's become increasingly well known over the last, even though he's very well known anyway, increasingly well known, I think, over the last 6 months through various media. Over to you, Adam.
Thank you, Rob. So I'd now like to introduce Dr. Adam Marshall, Director General from the British Chambers of Commerce. Adam has been leading the business group for 5 years and has been part of the British Chamber's leadership team for almost 12 years. He will be leaving the Chamber network in spring 2021. I personally wish to take this opportunity to thank Adam for being a great friend. You will be missed, Adam, and being such an inspirational leader. you've really enhanced the profile and the impact of the Chamber network. And never before has the Chamber network been more relevant or necessary. So I'd just like to take that time to say thank you and also to welcome you today.
Anna, thank you so much for that. And truth be told, it's down to the network that we've had the enhancement of profile, the success, and I think the influence that we've had in recent months at such a tricky time for all of our businesses. So thank you, one and all, to members of the Chamber and to the Chamber team too. The last time I was with you for your AGM, we were at the hotel by Gatwick Airport. I think it was indeed last year around this time. I think it was Martin Bannister's birthday on that day, if I remember correctly. And everyone was in a fairly cheery mood, worrying a bit about Brexit and impending deal or no deal questions. I remember talking to a couple of the members who were there on the day about that particular theme. I don't think any of us stood in Gatwick last year would have thought we would be where we are right now. So it just goes to show you life has interesting twists and turns from time to time, and we have certainly been through one. My team prepared me a nice note for today. If you don't mind, everyone, I won't tell them, but I won't use it. I'll speak to you a bit more extemporaneously if that's okay, and have a conversation with you. My preference would be, of course, that this conversation remains with us in this group, so I can be as frank as possible about what I have seen, where I think we are now, and where I think things are going. Anna mentioned already a little bit of the sort of backward-looking piece. What have we done collectively as a Chamber network? Have we had an impact? And the short answer is yes, absolutely. I remember sitting in the box room where I am right now on March the 20th of this year, having literally flipped the team from office-based to home working and from chamber-based to home working overnight. Thinking I'd be in here for about 3 or 4 weeks and then everything would go back to normal. But one of the very first things that we did was we convened the network on calls just like this, and we started to work together differently. We started to bring together the intelligence from the 53 chambers around the UK and now the 62 British chambers around the world. And that interaction, that constant communication, and that sort of live feedback loop let the BCC team do more when it came to our interaction with government and do it more quickly when it was needed to help businesses. So Anna mentioned a few of the schemes where we've had some influence, but I just thought I'd give you a little bit more detail about that, just so you know that when you tell something to the team locally, it can very often end up changing what happens nationally. An example that comes to my mind are around the loan schemes. So the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, for example. And Rob and I had many, many conversations about this in the early days, given his own expertise in the sector and given some of the feedback he was receiving from Sussex Chamber members too. The scheme in the beginning didn't work properly. No one could get through it. It was like someone stuffing sausage meat in the front end of the grinder and it popping back out the same end rather than working its way through. None of the applications really were getting service. Businesses were running out of cash, and it was a real problem. Because of the insight and input that we had from the network, we were able to get changes to the scheme from the British Business Bank, changes in behavior from the financial institutions and lenders at the front line in terms of the way they were doing things. And we were also able to influence the creation of the bounce back loan scheme so that for the smaller borrowers, there was a bigger guarantee and a more simple and straightforward process in order to get the cash that was needed to prevent many businesses from going over a cliff in the springtime. So that's a direct influence that we as Chambers of Commerce had. We were also in with the Treasury and with HMRC over the design of the furlough scheme. And I spent a couple of very, very hairy weeks working with HMRC. And my only question was, if you've just promised people that money will be in their account for furloughed workers within 6 days, are we sure the system's going to work? And how do we as a chamber network make sure that both the information you're asking businesses to provide and then that link to get them the cash quickly actually works? And truth be told, it did work. And again, we had an influence and an input, I think, there. And the same holds true, I think, for all of the guidance that's been issued for businesses so that workplaces could become COVID secure. If you think it's confusing now, you should have seen it before chamber teams were working on it over weekends, trying to tell civil servants that they needed to change the language entirely if it was actually going to be helpful and useful to real world businesses, rather than a nice piece of theory coming out of Whitehall. And people from across the network literally came together, gave up their Sunday afternoons, and worked on this stuff to get it to a point where it was actually usable for most businesses. So real concrete input. And the reason it occurred is not because of anything any one person did. It's about the way that we worked together. And if there's one thing that I would like to solidify before I eventually make my own transition out of the BCC next spring, is that that spirit of working that we've developed since March continues well into the future, because it's serving us well as a network, and we know it's serving our business communities well too, because it's delivering real results. So that's the backward looking piece of what I wanted to say. I then wanted to park very briefly in the here and now, if I can. I am a natural optimist, as some of you who have met me know. I tend to look on the bright side of things. But when I speak privately at the moment, I am really concerned about where we are right now, and then looking ahead at what the next 6 to 18 months could bring. Right now, I feel like we are more or less in the eye of a very big storm. I'm not sure how many of you have ever experienced in person a hurricane or a typhoon. If you have, whether visiting or living in other climes, or being present from Michael Fisher's famous one, the one thing I'd say to you is that the first leg is pretty surprising, pretty shocking. You then get to the eye of the storm where things calm down for a bit, but then it's the second leg of the storm that invariably causes the most destruction and the most havoc. Where we are right now, in my view, is we have traversed the first leg, obviously, between March and July, June, July. We've been in the eye of the storm for a couple of months over the summer. We are now exiting the eye of the storm into that second leg. Now, if you're an optimist like me, what you say is, even though it's going to be difficult, there is going to be a lot of opportunity for businesses who see new niches, new possibilities, new business models, and can start them during this period of change. If you're feeling more pessimistic, you'd say, yeah, there are going to be significant business closures. There are going to be significant job losses from business models that just don't work anymore. And of course, the cash problem that we faced in March is going to come back to us in a number of waves over the autumn and the winter, because of course, cash is always king, but even more so at a time of difficulty, there will be many businesses facing some problems in that regard in due course. So we are at a difficult moment right now. I feel like, once again, we had an influence at this point in time when the Chancellor stood up and gave his winter economy plan speech last week. Not because of the follow-on to the furlough scheme, the job support scheme that he introduced, which basically is a less generous version of a German short-time working scheme. No, not for that. The stuff that we really pushed for were all of the cash flow measures that were introduced to help businesses. I just want to mention a couple of those. One, which get almost no attention in the press, but which I see as very important, is for the first time ever, HMRC is letting businesses fraction back VAT payments over 11 months and smooth those payments over 11 monthly installments. It's always been when the VAT bill comes due, or you hit a quarter day, the bill is due. This is almost the first time I can think of, perhaps some have more experience than I do, but I can't think of any other occasion when we've convinced them to smooth what businesses owe to the exchequer so that businesses can manage their cash flow better. Similarly, they, at our request, extended the eligibility period for the two main loan schemes, Sybil's and Bounce Back, a few more months. And they did that because we argued that they needed to bridge to a replacement, because there's going to have to be some sort of government guaranteed loan scheme to keep working capital in the market for businesses for the medium term, because otherwise banks are going to pull back and say, there's absolutely no risk, I'm not lending any money to you at this particular moment in time. So they listened to that as well. And they extended the repayment periods from 6 to 10 years too, again, offering a cash flow boost for businesses. So I feel once again, we had a real influence and a real impact on some of the proposals. And I knew that in part because on Tuesday afternoon, I went into number 11 and I had 45 minutes with the Chancellor. This is before the statement. And we talked about a number of things, and he was very aware of what the chambers of commerce asks were, what else was, what was bothering businesses, what our crystal ball was telling us about what was going to happen over the coming months. And we have that connectivity, we have those links, we have the ability to go in and influence some of the key people. And again, that's because we are coming together and we are working together on some of the problems businesses are facing. I'll give you another example. I had a call from the business secretary literally last night at 8:30 yesterday evening. That kind of connectivity is very regular with some of the key people who are taking decisions for us. And we're able to feed in case studies and examples of why things are difficult or how they could change for the better, etc., and make propositions to try to make life easier for businesses. So we're having an influence in the here and now, even though we're about to enter into, I think, a difficult period, and our access remains very much there. That leads me on to looking ahead a little bit, and then I will finish and look forward to conversation. October to March is going to be really hard. I think we all know that. I think it's worth admitting it and saying it and being clear about it rather than beating around the bush. The end of the furlough scheme means businesses are going to be forced to take a decision on jobs which are on the borderline of viability. And we'll probably see a lot of very good jobs in our communities disappear during that period. We will see a number of businesses go insolvent as well. One thing that's always sort of interested me, and it amused me up until the COVID crisis, but I always remember the insolvency practitioners trade body saying the wave of insolvencies is coming, the wave of insolvencies is coming. They've been saying it since 2008, 2009. After a while, if you say something for long enough, you're going to be right. I think, unfortunately, and I don't say this facetiously, I think it's coming now. And we will see a lot of businesses that won't be here this time next year. Some of that is a natural result of the fact that the models no longer work in a world where we're using places differently. Some of it results from the fact that certain industries are still required to be closed. We will not stop pushing for additional government support, in particular for those industries that have been so hampered by the restrictions or forced to remain closed, but would have a viable business proposition thereafter. So we are not done trying to press for help and assistance within reason. We are also, though, really cognizant of the fact that we can only be asking the Treasury for so much money before markets decide that the Treasury is not worth lending money to anymore, because we are borrowing a huge amount as a country. So we are trying to be reasonable in our asks and not say, try to support absolutely every single business and every single job, but instead to try to support those that have a chance of coming out the other side. And in particular, those with supply chains, deep supply chains, and huge amount of capital expenditure over the years that would be really difficult to rebuild if they were to go under. So October to March will be difficult. It'll be difficult for individuals who are losing their jobs. It will be difficult for businesses facing those cash flow problems, and for some whose status as a going concern will no longer be clear. But I also think we need to focus in the medium term on making sure that there's working capital and growth capital out there, because even after this period of turbulence, we're going to have a lot of businesses out there that are going to need cash in order to grow again, in order to bring people back on, in order to change their business models or invest in new ways of doing things. And that's going to remain a top priority for me over the next few months, because unless we have that medium-term cash flow question sorted, then the recovery as and when it comes again is going to be more difficult. I say that as if businesses are shut. There are hundreds of thousands of firms that have remained open throughout. Many manufacturers, essential retail businesses, and others have kept going throughout. The work that people have done to adapt their businesses has been absolutely phenomenal too. And one thing we've always said and will continue to say is the relationship of trust that's been built up by employers and employees in many circumstances through this pandemic will mean that many will then decide how they go back to their workplace, how they take their business model forward, etc. So there are some positives that we can draw on as we go through this rather difficult period ahead. But I'm afraid economically, the numbers aren't going to look great for a while. And those of us like yourselves who are part of a business community and part of a leadership in a business community, we all need to extend our arms a little bit and support our fellow business people however and wherever we can. And through the community of Chambers of Commerce, I know we can do that. So if I can end on an optimistic note, I just want to say this. I don't think chambers have been more relevant at any point in all of the years I've been involved than they are right now. I also don't think they've been as challenged at any point over the course of my tenure as they are right now either, simply because we're being asked to do so many different things to support our communities. And of course, as ever, we're doing so with limited resources and limited people. So I want to pay tribute to the 1,700 people who work in Chambers of Commerce around the country. They've done a fantastic job through this entire ordeal that we've been through over recent months. They're continuing to do a fantastic job. And for someone like me who gets to convene those people, bring them together, and in some way try to add value to what they do on a day-to-day basis, that is a bedrock that we can rest on as we go forward and try to grow our business communities again, rebuild them and renew them too. So I wanted to stop there and say thank you to you all. You may have noticed that I purposefully didn't talk about Brexit because I'm sure it will come up in the questions. I wanted to talk about the situation we found ourselves in, but I look forward to the discussion and hopefully in the future to joining Sussex Chamber for other things once my tenure has completed. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Adam. I have had some questions already coming through the chat. So I'm going to start with a question from Penina, of our board directors. If regarding proposals and discussions to help director owners in the way that employees and self-employed have been provided assistance. I know that's one of our existing ongoing asks, isn't it?
Yeah, and Penina's absolutely right to raise it. The starting point is we campaigned quite hard on this because so many business people for so many years were encouraged to set up limited companies, were encouraged to use that route to structure their businesses, and they were left out of so much of the support mechanisms that were available. And there are some really, really difficult cases that we see out there. Indeed, one of our own board directors at the VCC finds themselves in a position like that and was very instructive in saying, well, look, without emotion, here is what is happening. Here is why the support schemes don't actually help when you're in this set of circumstances. So it is something that is always top of mind. My forehead is flat because I've banged it against the wall of the Treasury lots of times over the past 6 months. On this one, I thought that in the early days we might have a shot at getting some form of support. But as time went on, I thought it became less and less, and I see Penina nodding. So it seemed like they set their store against doing anything in this space. They did it with the self-employed because they know they've got a tax mechanism in terms of national insurance that they can eventually use to try to recoup some of it. But in terms of owner directors, despite all of our efforts, what they didn't see is that most of these are small businesses. These aren't sort of, dividend stripping operations or something like that, or shell companies being used for various purposes. But the HMRC argument was we can't distinguish very easily between the legitimate business that's set up as with an owner director and something that literally is just a financial vehicle. And I thought it was a pretty poor argument because I think they've got enough data to probably figure out which is which. And there were a lot of those sorts of arguments. So I guess my view is, if we have to chalk something up, Penina, to something where we tried and failed, that's probably one of the areas. And the strength of feeling in the network, definitely huge. We haven't stopped mentioning it as part of our stump speech, but the Treasury, I think, in a lot of cases has moved on. They're trying to say, we saved who we thought we could save. We're not doing any more of that now. We're not in emergency mode anymore. We're in rebuild mode, and rebuild means what's viable for the future. So I think it will be hard to get anything else unless we end up in a far more difficult medical situation than we are right now.
Thank you. The next question I have is from Andrew Swain at Ricardo. He's interested on your views on what green recovery looks like and how the region might benefit from this.
It's a really good question, Andrew. I think the first thing I would say on it is I'm quite bored of hearing about this from the mouths of government and ESG documents, and I think it's time we help to bring it into the world of reality, through the way chambers do things, and talk about what could a 15 or 20-minute town or city look like, for example, which is very real. Could you live, work, and accomplish all of your day-to-day life within a 15 to 20-minute radius, for example? If we plan our communities in a different way, are we going to support businesses to become more energy efficient by giving them investment incentives looking forward? If you were investing in green technology, or if you were investing in carbon efficiency, could you have sharper incentives for your business? So what I'm really interested in, I guess, Andrew, is some of the practicalities around this. There's been a lot of talk about it, but it never becomes very tangible. And thinking about businesses and where they sit within communities and what our travel and geographic footprint looks like, I think will be one element of this for the future. But so too will be, how do you create the right carrots rather than sticks to bring businesses along? The government discourse feels like it's all about things like the COP26 climate change conference in Glasgow. And I was in an uncomfortable meeting a couple of weeks ago where I literally stuck my hand up and said, listen, a few big companies and global actors understand what this climate change conference is and what it means. You need to figure out a way to democratize that in the business community and say, this is not about a conference, this is about how we change the way we do things in our country. Until they figure out how to do that, I think it could remain a little bit rarefied. So I'm hopeful that we can focus on the practicalities as we look forward.
Thank you. I have a question from Angela Crane at Ada and Worthing Councils. What's the best support or interventions that the local authorities might be able to provide businesses that survived the pandemic, but they're now heavily in debt, and so they're growing at a much slower pace?
Thanks, Anna. Angela, I have 3 words for you to start with, which is discretionary rates relief. So if councils could use their discretionary powers to the maximum extent possible to support businesses, I know that would be appreciated. Although I think a lot of businesses also understand the financial pressure that local authorities are under too. So they don't make the ask lightly. But if councils want to step in and support firms, that's one way they could do it. Another is with planning and various other sort of regulatory elements. Any easements they can put in to make life easier and reduce burdens for firms during this period, I know would be welcome too. We're working extensively with a lot of local authorities on the question of businesses who are in debt. We're also working with the city very heavily on that as well, and contributed to something called the recapitalization report, which is real experts in the financial sector trying to look at ways to deal with the debt burden so that businesses basically don't stop investing and stop growing because they've got all this debt. And that's something we would continue to do. But with councils, there's discretionary relief, forbearance, making sure that any premises inspections or other regulatory functions are carried out in a way that suits the business and doesn't create additional costs or burdens for them, because so many of them are battling for survival right now.
I have a question from Martin, who was, as you say, celebrating his birthday when we had the AGM last year.
I remember.
He said that for some of the travel hospitality businesses, they expect recovery to be delayed for about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And some may not survive. So what could another year of lockdowns look like in terms of support that we might expect from government on a long-term basis?
I would call this, unlike Panina's question earlier, where it's a fight that I feel we've broadly lost. This is one that's ongoing. Other countries have put support measures in place with a slightly longer term view than we have. So even the Treasury's latest job support scheme has got a 6-month expiry on it, which feels short when the Germans and the French have already put theirs to the end of 2021 and are talking about more medium term packages. You know, with travel, I think it is going to be an extremely long recovery. With hospitality, it feels like a bit more of a yo-yo right now. At the one point they thought that, as things were reopening, that things would get restarted, et cetera, but it could be a sort of fits and starts. I don't see travel as much in fits and starts as a slow recovery. And we know that some industries are going to need additional support. I think about the aerospace and aviation industry rather a lot, quite frankly, as being one that in particular requires additional support. We need global connectivity from the UK for the future. We need, things like, you host one of our biggest assets in Gatwick Airport on the Sussex Chamber patch. We need that functioning and succeeding in future. We need the cargo hold space for manufacturing businesses to export their stuff around the world and for supply chains to work. So I think there will need to be some additional sectoral support there. I'm going to say something privately, which might be a bit controversial. I'd be interested in views. And this is not BCC policy. This is an Adam observation, if that's okay. I personally am more worried about those businesses like the aerospace industry, billions and billions invested over the years in a supply chain. I'm more worried about that falling over than I am about less capital intensive businesses in some other sectors. So, if we lose some of those anchors, they're not coming back. Whereas if, unfortunately, and I'm not saying I'm trying to prioritize here, if we lose some hospitality businesses over this period, many of their owners are great entrepreneurs and will bring them back in another form when conditions allow for that to happen. I'm just trying to acknowledge a reality that I see, and one of the really difficult trade-offs that people like me see when we're trying to figure out if there's support available, how is it best prioritized? And others may feel differently, and I completely understand that. But that's a personal view on what I see rather than BCC policy.
You were talking about the aviation sector. Now, the Gatwick Crawley area has been hugely impacted. Gatwick Airport's only operating at 20% at the moment. And a lot of the aviation, the hospitality, leisure industry around that area has also been impacted. Crawley will be, there are several thousand people currently on furlough still.
Yeah.
So I have a question here from Carolyn Bentley from Coast Capital Growth Hub, looking at are government aware of some of the areas or the pockets, the areas of economic success, and what is really needed in order to help support them? Because, we've had huge success with full employment. It's an area of great need due to its reliance on the travel industry. But there's a lot of focus on the North and the Midlands at the moment.
Yeah.
Adam, sorry.
I don't detect a focus, Carolyn, on the North and the Midlands when it comes to aviation, like a difference between the focus geographically on different parts of the UK when it comes to aviation. If anything, there's a bit more focus perhaps on Heathrow than anyone else because they are shouting the most loudly about the predicament and what is going on in some of the needs and solutions. My view is, this may not surprise you because Ruby McGregor-Smith, who is our president at the BCC, also chairs the Airport Operators Association, is we need to get our airports open and working again. We need to get business travel with the appropriate testing regime back up and running again. We have got to get the supply chains that create the employment hubs around those airports moving again. And whilst the leisure industry is going to take some time and perhaps shouldn't start up as soon, we need the business travel industry back up desperately. And I will do everything I can to try to support that. Now, for Gatwick, that wouldn't be as positive a message as it might be for some other airports because of the mix of leisure and business travel. But if I look at what Anna and her team do in terms of the volumes of cargo that go through Gatwick, and in terms of its use as a global business hub in certain respects, we need to get it moving. So I agree with you entirely. The beautiful thing about being a national business organization is we have to argue for absolutely all parts of the country rather than one over another. I don't think Gatwick or Crawley has been forgotten in what we're doing, and I promise you it won't be going forward.
Thank you. The reason for my comment was that when we had there were some small grants recently, and the southeast, it wasn't just Gatwick Crawley, but the southeast got quite a small piece of the pie. It wasn't a very big pie anyway, you kind of felt perhaps that the southeast, is considered that it bounces back and it's strong and everything. But Crawley's been a very unusual situation in my working lifetime of over 30 years in this area. I've never seen it on its knees the way it is, anything remotely like that. So.
Yeah. No, and I completely agree. It is a moment of increased difficulty. But if I were to look back 20 years to when regional development agencies had their allocations of funding, we were having the same conversation even then. More money going to the Midlands and the North than went into the Southeast. And the sort of phrase "victims of success" always comes to mind. I think when it comes to grants, I think though when it comes to political attention, there is no reason why one area should have less input or support than others. I know the MPs in the area are extremely supportive of trying to get the airport moving again. We will work with Stuart Wingate and the team there, and we'll work with others to try to make that happen.
Thank you.
Adam, sorry, if I can just jump in, because you quite rightly mentioned in terms of aviation, the supply chain, and just to, so this is personal, it's not me as chair of the chamber, I jointly own and run a small electrical assemblies business that is solely in the aviation supply chain, and principally assembles lower order assemblies for flight simulators. And once the orders that we have are completed this week, we have no orders at all.
Yeah.
And that hasn't happened for this business in over 40 years. So we'll work that out, which we will. But it's just it's just down that supply chain, and it's just a comment to add some colour to it. That after today, there is not a single order for the business.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we see lots of those, and businesses like that, once they disappear, it takes out a link in that chain, and we have great difficulty facing us as a country if we want to restart that industry. This is where the Germans have done a better job. They have made sure that those sorts of industries and those sorts of supply chains had more cash support, and they invested state money directly in some of the big primes and OEMs so that those supply chains wouldn't collapse as well. I think there is still a case for that. I speak to the Treasury and others very regularly on this. They say individual companies can approach them via Project Birch and everything else, etc. But so far, how many businesses have had aid via Project Birch and the Treasury? The answer is one steel company, and that's it. So, I think there's more they could do, and we will certainly try to make sure that happens.
I think just to add to that in terms of the aviation, Andrew Swain just made a comment here that whilst Gatwick is critical, we also need to keep an eye on the general aviation, like Shoreham and Goodwood being examples of that.
Yeah, no, understood. And look, there's a whole ecosystem around aviation where things are dire at the moment, and I completely agree that we have a massive problem. We've got to get business. If we get business travel and business aviation moving again, that's got to be the first. That's got to be the first step. It depends on the testing and tracing system actually working. I'm not sure how many of you have downloaded the NHS app yet. But I'm keeping a close eye on it over these few days to see how it works or it doesn't work or anything else. But I think these kinds of things seem to have taken us too long. Other countries, if you go to Italy as a business traveler right now, I was speaking to a company in Dorset yesterday whose chief exec is Italian. You get tested at the airport, you go on your way, and I take it as on a risk-based system. So business people can move into Italy and move around in Italy. Conversely, you come back home, 14 days inside your house, no contact with anyone. That can't be a business-friendly environment, and we've got to get it sorted.
Thank you. I'll just pick up the sort of Q&A from here. So, Adam, to just change the tone and lighten the mood, I thought we pick up the elephant in the room, as Andrew called it, and ask you what you think about the Brexit situation, deal, and probability, just for a bit of light, really.
The noisier it gets, the closer they are to some sort of landing zone, is my view of the situation from where I sit, and it is getting noisier. Look, the sticking points right now are the UK's state aid regime. How are we going to support companies in future, and will that be on a basis that the European Union believes is fair? Fish, which is all political and as a percentage of the economy is extraordinarily minimal, and the governance mechanism to oversee the relationship between the UK and the EU. That's all that's left, basically. Everything else they've got more or less agreement on, zero tariffs and things like that. What I think is worrying me is that a lot of businesses are focused on whether there's a deal or no deal, and not focused enough on the fact that come December 31st, even if there is a deal, there's a shed load of stuff that they still have to do to be ready. Trading across borders from December 31st is going to be completely different, even with a deal. There is going to be paperwork. Anna's bringing on a team, to do customs declarations and to help companies with customs declarations. The BCC has been running, building the Chamber Customs portal so that we can do that work. And, unfortunately, there's going to be a lot more of that sort of paperwork to do. We want to put Chambers in a good place to help businesses with it. But a lot of companies out there still haven't taken steps to prepare because they're saying, logically in their own heads, well, I want to see how the negotiations pan out first. But whatever happens with the negotiations, there's change. And preparing for that change now has got to be essential. I think there will be, my view is there will be some sort of deal. It will be slender, and it won't cover that much, but there will be some sort of deal at the end of this process. Because I think it would be seen as a failure of statecraft on both sides if we had nothing at all. Even though both sides are bellicose and saying that they'd be able to handle the consequences. So that's my thinking right now. But of course, anything can happen. And now I've just made a prediction, which I always say I never will do. And 24 hours is a long time. Watch someone walk away from the table tomorrow.
Yeah, we are recording the meeting, I think.
Yes, well, I've just given myself the caveats and the get-out clause there, saying don't take any of my predictions seriously.
Any further comment on Brexit? Or I'll turn to a question from Ben. You can always come back with a bit of time. So, Adam, Ben's asked a question around, I guess, the funding mechanisms for government, the amount of, how long can the government, support, will it be willing and able to support the economy financially? Now I have a view on that, but obviously I'll put the question to yourself.
Yeah, look, the Chancellor makes it very clear that the government cannot go on supporting jobs and the economy indefinitely. And I think that is understandable because the resources have to come from somewhere, and we've borrowed a huge amount this year on the markets. If we were borrowing to invest, i.e. if they were borrowing a huge amount on the markets to plow into our physical and digital infrastructure, I think the markets would look past that for quite a while because you'd see where the return would be to the economy over a long period of time. But the fact is right now they're borrowing enormous amounts to fund what is in effect current spending. It's in-year spending. And there will come a point at which they simply feel they cannot do so much of that anymore. And I think that's already happening. And we see the tapering of some of the support schemes is evidence of that fact. They have a job that is more difficult than any of our own, which is to figure out what the slope of that taper should be and how fast that support should be withdrawn. If they get it wrong in one direction, they're accused of profligacy. If they get it wrong in the other direction, they're accused of kicking the legs out from under the economy. So I don't envy them. What we try to do is to provide them with as much fact, as much evidence, as much insight, and as much data as possible so that they take the best possible decisions on that and make those decisions based on real world business conditions rather than on politics. You know, I may be naive after all these years in the job and think that someone would still make a decision based on economic reality rather than politics, but I still believe it's the best route for us to take.
Yeah, I think just to comment on that, Adam, I think you said they make the best decision. You know, I think this period reminds me that politicians have to make the least worst decision in almost every case, and that's the challenge. I think the one thing that the UK government has consistent with some others is, you know, has a reasonable credit rating. Cost of funds are incredibly low. You know, the structural deficit, budget deficit, does have to be dealt with at some point. As you say, you know, it's borrowed for current spending, but the borrowing capacity and the ability to service that debt when you know, yields, you know, gilt yields, that they are so low, that it's actually, you know, my view, it's not the most pressing problem.
Yeah.
Actually, the size of the debt and the ability to service it, the ability to refinance it. I'm with you, Adam. I think my take is that the government is trying very hard to signal a shift and a change, you know, as looking to support sustainable jobs, sustainable rebuilding, regrowth, and renewing, rather than just propping up to you know, to get through the initial period. But it's just, those messages are incredibly difficult to receive and very mixed when, you know, we haven't actually, you know, really come through any period, and we don't actually see that we're coming out the other side yet.
Yeah.
But personally, I don't think, and I think general economic view, that, you know, the actual size of the debt mountain of itself isn't necessarily that problematical.
Yeah, and that's why we've said that, you know, over the short term, over the next couple of years, the priority's got to be restarting the economy, not scaling back the debt. But it's then, you know, at that moment in time, is the next step really to pull it back, or is it to keep going? And that's those difficult judgment calls that they're going to have to take.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Thank you.
Okay. Various comments. Let me come to a question from Steve, the UK Lighting. An observation, and then you've got, I think you've got questions as well, but I'll try and wrap these two together, Steve, if that's okay. I think there's an observation that, you know, it's a challenge for us as a chamber, but an observation I know does get raised at the regional assemblies we've had, and I'm familiar with it, is that, you know, the South East getting viewed as one block with London, and you know, and therefore everything must be okay.
Yeah.
You know, and we've talked long and hard, and will continue to do so, about, you know, infrastructure, and obviously infrastructure is beyond, you know, roads and physical transport links nowadays. But I think we certainly, Sussex, hold the view, and I know Kent would as well, that it seems as though the South East is a catch-all that really means London in the minds of most people, and therefore we feel we sometimes you know, miss out on funding because we're seen as part of that. You know, that economic powerhouse, which for parts of us we're not. And if you know, as we said for many years, if you try and traverse east to west, you know, you'd spend a very long time doing it, very frustratingly.
Yes, and I've spent my days on the A25 and things like that as well. I'm with you on that. So I completely understand. You know, look, in terms of the infrastructure, you know, I think there's a strong case for spending more in all parts of the UK on improvements to infrastructure. The challenge for the chamber right now is figuring out what the top 2 or 3 priorities within that, and then using both your bully pulpit with local MPs and us to try to say, if you want to do things that are shovel ready and do things that are quick that will help the local economy, here are a couple of priorities that really are ready to go that you can do. And I think that's what we have to do collectively right now, is to say, here's the most important stuff, let's get it done. Yeah. I was looking at Steve's second question around, you know, local authorities using companies in their area and trying to support them with contracts and frameworks. There's a couple of things going on there. One, we don't know what the procurement rules are going to be after the UK's departure from the EU. There is an opportunity right now via the Cabinet Office to participate in rewriting what the procurement system looks like. You know, you can give greater weight, for example, to social value, which includes the value of buying within communities, perhaps in future contracts. You could simplify the process so that people don't have to do ridiculous PQQs and ridiculous amounts of paperwork in order to get a contract. But I actually find that rather than changes to the process, the areas that have the most success are the ones that build grassroots campaigns to try to get local authorities, county councils, other public bodies, hospital trusts, for example, to buy more locally or to look at local options in their procurement processes. And we've seen that successfully in a lot of parts of the Chamber network, and I think it's something we'll see more of in due course. You know, I would like to say that the procurement rules in this country will become simpler after our exit from the EU process and OJU and all that other stuff pretty soon. I don't hold out great hope, because actually EU procurement rules were used as a bogeyman by successive UK governments to cover over the fact that they were busy gold plating them and making them more complicated than they needed to be. The rules actually weren't as bad as we made them ourselves. So hopefully we will learn the lessons of having done that before and do it better next time.
Thank you. There's one more question in on the chat that I'll put to Adam, and then if there's any last questions, we'll start to bring things to a close. So it might call for another prediction, actually, Adam. To Andrew's question outside of Brexit, increasing trade wars, rates of international noise. Actually, there's a segue to the point around, you know, buying locally and you know, decided becoming more nationalistic. So I think you might fit in a prediction about the US election outcome here as well, how that would play into things.
Right. Never underestimate any candidate in an American election and think that you know the result of said election with 5 weeks to go. Anything could still happen would be my answer to that particular question, which allows my crystal ball to remain cloudy, Rob. So thank you very much for that. However, you know, there is a lot of international noise around. I would be, you know, given the way we trade as a UK with the US right now and our relationship with the US right now, I don't think there's a problem there. There's a potential upside in future if they intensify trading links by having a trade agreement between the governments. But things work as they do right now, and people trade very successfully between the UK and the US as things stand. Deterioration in the trade relationship, not just with the EU, but deterioration in the trade relationship, say, with China, would have a far more material effect in what's going on in the US right now. And whether there is an ability to separate out the economic relationship we have with China with some of the political concerns that people have or not, will, I think, determine what happens with some of that trade. The other thing that I would mention, though, is there are some upsides. I was doing an event, a webinar yesterday with Liz Truss, the Trade Secretary. And one of the things we were talking about there was the UK-Japan agreement that was signed fairly recently. There are some opportunities with Japan that go beyond where we were with in the EU agreement with Japan. So on digital services, for example, there's a little bit more headroom for people to do more digitally, and a few other areas too. I think we'll see more trade agreements. We'll see more exhortations from the UK government to look out into different markets around the world. And slowly but steadily, a lot of businesses will look at opportunities in those. I think getting the country open again to trade and to business travel is going to be very important to making that happen.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any final questions? Burning questions that people haven't raised yet? Otherwise, I'll bring things to a close. Anything coming in? Any raised hands, Anna, that I can't see?
No, there's no raised hands at all, Rob.
Thank you, everyone. It just leaves me, and I just say a word of thanks to Adam, and to formally close the meeting. So, Adam, thank you for joining us again for the second time at our AGM. I know you won't make it a hat trick because you won't be in the role this time next year, but rest assured you will always be invited back to Sussex Chamber, because you talk sense and you add incredible value when you do it on every occasion. You know, I've known you for a number of years, so I just want to formally thank you for joining our AGM, and then on behalf of Sussex Air members and myself, say, you know, thank you for the huge job that you've done at the Chamber. You know, I know you've got 6 months to go, and you'll be giving your all for that period. But as Ari felt, I think, you know, you've changed the Chamber from the inside for the better. I think you changed it to a listening organisation, and to one that listens but is then proactive, not reactive. And I think that the Chamber has become, for the good of the country's members, an intelligent change agent, but based in the real world and able to look across national and local issues. And I think, without overdoing it, the Chamber network is in your debt. You've done a fantastic job. You will be missed, and obviously we'll find out what you're moving on to, but I'm quite sure you're not short of opportunities and offers. So thank you, and we will invite you back at the earliest opportunity. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining the Chamber's AGM and the session with Adam. I'll formally close the meeting now and wish you an enjoyable rest of the week. The Chamber is here. Shout as ever, let us know your views. I'm not going to make any prediction about the future whatsoever. But the Chamber, its team, will continue to work tirelessly to represent our members' interests. So thank you very much. I'll now formally close the meeting and say cheerio for now.
Thank you very much, Adam. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.